Tiedän, että olet tottunut lyhyisiin englanninkielisiin lauseisiin, mutta tänään haluan tarjota sinulle jotain erilaista, tarinan, joka auttaa sinua rentoutumaan ja oppimaan samalla. Paina tykkäystä ja kerro kommenteissa, jos haluaisit nähdä lisää tällaisia videoita.
Once upon a time, in a small village near the sea, there was a woman named Emily. She lived in a little house with a garden that she loved very much. The garden was not very big, but it was full of flowers, trees, and small paths that led to hidden corners. Every morning, Emily would wake up early and walk through her garden before breakfast. She enjoyed the fresh air, the soft sound of the birds, and the light wind that moved the leaves gently. The garden was more than just a place for plants. It was a place for memories. Emily remembered her childhood while taking care of the flowers. The roses reminded her of sunny days spent with her siblings, and the sunflowers reminded her of long summers full of laughter. Every plant had a story, and every story had a color, a smell, and a feeling. The garden was alive, not only with nature, but also with her memories. One morning, Emily decided to plant a new tree in the middle of the garden. She wanted it to be special, a symbol of all the happy moments in her life. She chose a small olive tree and planted it carefully. Every day, she watered it and watched it grow. Neighbors who passed by often stopped to admire the garden. They said it was beautiful. But for Emily, the most important thing was not the beauty. It was the memories that each plant contained. As the days passed, Emily would sit under the olive tree and think about the people who had been part of her life. She remembered friends, family, and even strangers who had shared small moments with her. Sometimes she felt joy, other times a little sadness. But she knew that all these memories were part of her life, and she loved each one. The garden was her way of holding these moments close. Seasons changed slowly. In spring, the flowers bloomed with bright colors. The air smelled of fresh grass and new blossoms. Birds built nests in the trees, and the sun shone warmly every morning. Emily loved walking through the paths, touching the petals, and listening to the quiet sounds of nature. She sometimes imagined that the garden was telling her a story of life and time. During the summer, the garden became even more lively. Bees moved from flower to flower, collecting nectar, and butterflies danced in the air. Emily often sat on a small bench near the olive tree and watched the shadows move with the sun. She felt peace in her heart, and sometimes she closed her eyes to enjoy the moment completely. She thought about how simple things could bring the greatest happiness. The wind, the light, the colors of the sky, all of these were part of her life. One day, Emily found a small stone path at the far end of the garden that she had not noticed before. It led to a hidden corner, filled with small flowers and a tiny fountain. The water made a soft sound as it fell into the small basin. Emily sat there for a long time, listening to the water and smelling the flowers. She realized that life was full of small hidden treasures, and that sometimes you needed to take your time to find them. Autumn arrived quietly, bringing a soft golden light that covered everything in the garden. The trees slowly changed their colors, turning green into shades of orange, yellow, and red. The air became cooler, and the smell of the sea mixed with the scent of dry leaves. Emily spent more time wearing her old sweater, sitting on the same wooden bench near the olive tree. The garden looked different now, but she loved it just as much. It reminded her that everything in life changes, Yet beauty always remains in some form. Every morning, she picked up the fallen leaves and placed them in small piles. She liked the soft sound they made under her hands. The flowers were fading, but she knew that they would return next spring. The olive tree, still young, had grown taller, and its small silver-green leaves shone in the sunlight. Emily sometimes talked to it in her thoughts, as if it were an old friend who listened silently to her stories. The tree was becoming part of her daily rhythm, quiet, patient, and full of life. As days grew shorter, Emily spent more evenings inside her little house, reading old notebooks where she had written pieces of her life. Many pages were filled with memories of people and places she once loved. Some names made her smile. Others brought a small tear to her eyes. But she didn't feel lonely. The garden outside was like a mirror of her heart, full of things that once were, yet still alive in another way. On rainy days, she watched from the window as water covered the paths, creating small puddles that reflected the gray sky. The sound of rain hitting the roof was soft and calming. Sometimes she would open the door just to smell the fresh air. She loved how the garden looked after the rain. Everything seemed cleaner, brighter, and full of quiet energy. The olive tree stood strong even when the wind was rough. It reminded her of the strength people find in themselves after difficult times. As winter approached, Emily decided to prepare the garden for the cold months. She covered the soil around the plants with dry leaves to protect them from frost. She cleaned the small fountain and stored the bench under the porch. But she left the olive tree uncovered. She believed it needed to feel the cold to grow stronger. Every evening, before going to bed, she would look out the window and see the tree standing alone in the moonlight. It gave her comfort, knowing that even in silence and stillness, life continued beneath the surface. The first snow came in December. It fell softly, turning the garden white and quiet. Emily watched the snowflakes land on the olive tree's branches and melt slowly. The world seemed to stop for a moment. She realized how peaceful everything was when she simply watched without trying to change anything. That night, she went to sleep feeling thankful. Thankful for the garden, for the memories, and for the calm that filled her heart. Winter slowly faded away, leaving behind a quiet beauty. The snow melted, and small drops of water fell from the roof, shining like glass in the sunlight. The air felt lighter now, and a gentle warmth returned to the mornings. Emily opened her windows for the first time in months and breathed in the fresh air. It smelled of earth, rain, and something new that she couldn't quite name, the soft beginning of spring. The garden looked different, almost shy. The ground was still dark and wet, but tiny green shoots had already begun to appear. The olive tree stood proudly in the center, stronger than before, its branches spreading wider. Emily smiled when she saw it. She walked outside and gently touched the rough bark. "You made it," she whispered softly, though she didn't realize she was speaking aloud. The garden, in its quiet way, was alive again. Days grew longer, and the sun stayed a little higher in the sky each afternoon. Emily worked slowly, cleaning the flower beds and planting new seeds. She added small wooden signs with the names of each flower: lavender, daisies, marigolds, and thyme. She didn't rush. She moved with calm hands, enjoying every small task. The garden didn't ask for perfection. It only asked for care. Every seed she placed into the soil felt like a promise, a hope that life would keep returning. In April, the first blossoms appeared. Soft pink and white flowers covered the branches near the stone wall. Bees buzzed gently around them, and a pair of birds built a nest in the olive tree. Emily watched them from her bench, amazed at how the garden seemed to take care of itself. She realized that everything here had its own rhythm, a quiet wisdom she had learned to follow. Sometimes she brought her cup of tea outside and just listened to the wind move through the leaves. It was like the garden spoke in a language without words. By early May, color returned everywhere. The fountain sparkled under the sunlight, surrounded by flowers in full bloom. The paths were dry again, and butterflies danced above the grass. Emily often walked barefoot across the warm stones, feeling the earth beneath her feet. She noticed how different her heart felt. Lighter, calmer, more open. It wasn't only the garden that had changed. She had too. The months of silence and cold had softened something inside her. She didn't fear the passing of time anymore. She had learned that every ending carries the seed of a new beginning. Sometimes children from the village stopped by the fence, watching the garden with wide eyes. Emily would wave at them and invite them to look closer. She loved showing them how the olive tree had grown, or how the bees worked from flower to flower. Their laughter filled the air, mixing with the songs of the birds. The garden, once a quiet refuge, now felt alive with new voices and joy. Emily felt like she was sharing not just a place, but a lesson, that beauty needs time, patience, and kindness to grow. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Emily sat on her bench again. The golden light touched everything. The flowers, the stones, the old wooden fence. The olive tree cast a long shadow across the garden, like a guardian watching over its home. She closed her eyes and listened. The sound of wind, leaves, and distant laughter blended into one peaceful melody. She thought of all the seasons that had passed, of everything she had lost and found again. The garden had taught her something she would never forget, that life always continues, quietly, beautifully, even when no one is watching. Summer arrived with a golden calm. The days stretched long and bright, and the air carried the sweet smell of flowers and warm soil. Every corner of the garden seemed alive. Bees hummed lazily in the lavender. Butterflies moved from bloom to bloom, and the fountain's gentle trickle filled the quiet afternoons. The olive tree stood at the center, strong and graceful, its leaves shining silver in the sunlight. Emily spent more time outside now, her hands deep in the earth, her mind free of worry. The garden had become not just a place, but a part of her. Each morning began the same way. She stepped out barefoot, feeling the soft grass under her feet and the warmth of the sun on her skin. She watered the plants, trimmed the dry leaves, and spoke softly to the flowers as if they could hear her. "You're doing beautifully," she would whisper with a smile. The rhythm of her days followed the rhythm of nature. Patient, slow, and full of quiet joy. There was something deeply peaceful about it, something that words couldn't explain. By July, the garden was in full bloom. The colors were so bright, they almost hurt the eyes. Deep reds, sunny yellows, soft purples. The air was thick with the smell of herbs and roses. In the afternoons, Emily liked to rest in the shade under the olive tree with a book in her lap. Sometimes she didn't even read. She just sat, watching the play of light and shadow on the ground. The sound of cicadas filled the air, a song that reminded her of long summers from her childhood. It made her heart feel both heavy and light at the same time. Heavy with memory, light with gratitude. The garden often brought visitors now. Neighbors stopped by to admire the flowers or ask for advice about their own gardens. Children came running to pick fallen petals or chase butterflies. Emily welcomed everyone with tea and a gentle laugh. She liked how life had returned, not only to the soil, but also to the people around her. The garden had become a small meeting place, a corner of peace in a noisy world. Everyone who entered seemed to slow down, to breathe differently, to smile a little more. One afternoon, an old friend visited, someone she hadn't seen in years. They sat together by the fountain, talking softly about their lives, their families, and the time that had passed. Emily realized how much had changed, and yet how familiar everything still felt. Her friend looked around and said, "This place feels alive, like it remembers everything." Emily smiled. "Maybe that's what makes it special," she replied. "It holds memories the way trees hold light." Her words hung in the warm air, and they both sat in silence, listening to the leaves rustling above them. As the days grew hotter, Emily started working early in the mornings and resting during the afternoons. Sometimes she took short naps in the hammock near the porch, the soft sound of the wind rocking her to sleep. In her dreams, she often saw the garden from above, a living painting of color and calm, breathing with every breeze. When she woke, she always felt thankful. Life, she thought, didn't need to be big to be meaningful. It just needed attention, kindness, and time. One evening, a summer storm came. The sky turned dark, and the wind blew hard across the garden. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, bending the flowers and shaking the branches. Emily watched from the window, her heart beating fast. She worried for her plants, especially the olive tree. But when the storm finally passed, she ran outside to check. The garden was messy, petals scattered, leaves torn. But the olive tree stood firm, water dripping from its branches. Emily laughed softly, relief washing over her. The garden, like life itself, had endured. The next morning, the air was fresh and cool. Everything glistened under the sunlight. The stones, the leaves, even the smallest blades of grass. Emily walked slowly through the garden, breathing deeply. The storm had cleaned everything, leaving behind a deeper stillness. She realized that every season, every storm, every quiet morning had taught her something. The garden was her teacher, showing her that beauty is not about perfection, but about endurance, patience, and the courage to begin again. That night, she sat on her bench with a notebook in her lap. The garden around her glowed softly in the moonlight. She began to write, not about the flowers or the weather, but about the feelings that had grown inside her. Words came slowly but naturally. The garden keeps changing, but it's always the same. Maybe I'm the same too, different, but still me. She closed the notebook and smiled. The sound of crickets filled the air, and the olive tree's shadow stretched long across the ground. The night was warm and still, and Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, complete peace. As summer slowly faded, the sunlight softened, and the evenings grew quiet again. The air turned cooler, carrying the scent of dry grass and fading flowers. The garden began to rest. Colors that once burned bright now changed to gold and brown, and the sound of cicadas gave way to the whisper of the wind. Emily felt the change not only around her, but within her too. The busy days of summer had passed, and what remained was a gentle calm, the kind that comes after a long, beautiful story. She spent her mornings sweeping the fallen petals from the paths and trimming the last flowers of the season. The olive tree stood tall and steady, its leaves still green, though the world around it was turning towards sleep. Emily often paused beside it, resting her hand against the trunk. The bark felt warm from the afternoon sun. She thought of how small it had been when she first planted it, how it had grown through wind and rain, through silence and laughter, just like her. One evening, she sat on her bench with a blanket around her shoulders. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and violet, and the first stars appeared one by one. The fountain murmured quietly, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Emily smiled. She didn't need anything more. The garden was enough, full of memories, of seasons, of quiet lessons that had shaped her life. Every corner held a story. Every leaf seemed to remember her touch. She thought about the years that had passed, about all the changes she had lived through. There had been loneliness, joy, waiting, and discovery. But through it all, the garden had been her constant companion, always there, always teaching her how to begin again. She realized that she no longer feared time passing. Each season had its purpose. Each ending carried its own quiet beauty. As darkness fell, she rose slowly and walked to the olive tree one last time. The moonlight touched its silver leaves, making them shimmer like tiny stars. She whispered softly, "Thank you," not sure if she meant the garden, the tree, or life itself. Maybe all three. The wind answered with a gentle rustle, and for a moment everything felt perfectly still, as if the world was holding its breath. Emily turned toward her house, the warm light glowing through the window. Behind her, the garden rested peacefully under the night sky. It would sleep through the coming winter, and one day, when the snow melted again, it would wake, just as it always had. And Emily knew that somewhere inside her, the garden would keep growing forever.